most other whales, they don't feed on plankton in the water column for the most part, or on fish. They mainly feed on benthic amphipods. Another kind of principle established with that first panel was that IUCN would ensure its independence and ensure transparency, which is really important. I'll get to that in a minute. And the panel also, as part of its report, made quite a strong statement about the need for range-wide conservation effort, which is what, again, Alexei mentioned, but this has been on the table from the start, really. So after our report was submitted in 2005, the lenders wanted to have some clarification from us on what was in the panel report. So we had a workshop in late 2005, and then there was a gap period before the current sort of permanent or semi-permanent panel could be established, when the company needed advice because the construction was going ahead in the summer of 2007. So in 2006, sorry. So in early 2006, IUCN convened what we called an interim independent scientists group to review the project for that coming construction season. And finally, in October 2006, the current panel was established, and the earlier panel, as I said, had been set up by the Business and Biodiversity Program of IUCN, and it was decided within IUCN that the program should be housed, convened, and overseen by Carl's program, the Global Marine and Polar Program, in 2006. And so that's where this project has been for the first 5 years and beyond. The composition was very similar to the previous independent panel. So, key features of the current panel. It's very similar to the previous one, but with many more collaborative elements. And this I think is an important point about this fine line between independence and collaboration. In one of the most, I think, effective parts of the panel in its first 5 years has been that we've been able to meet in these task forces, which are set up by the panel. They are instruments of the panel and chaired by one of the panel members. But they include technical private discussions with the company representatives, their scientists, consultants, and independent non-panel scientists that the panel decides it wants to have involved. And in these are called associated scientists here. The task forces then report in detail to the whole panel at the panel meetings, and that's where observers, as you see here, are present, and they include lender representatives, NGO representatives, and occasionally, although not often enough, representatives of government agencies. This is Ministry of Natural Resources, MNR. An important feature of having those people present, apart from their opportunity to hear us debate, hear the company present its view, the panel ask questions and express opinions. The NGOs particularly, and some of the lenders as well, provide really important information to the panel, so their involvement is often key. The transparency issue, which is again provided by IUCN, is really important, and the meeting reports, including the task force reports, which can be quite lengthy and technical, are always completed, finalized, and made public on the website. They live on the website, which I'll show you in a minute. Also on the website are letters that the panel might send. We've sent letters to the Russian Prime Minister and to different ministries. Public statements that we make to no one in particular, but to state a position of the panel. These are all on the public website. And then the final item on this list is the recommendations, which are, to me, the real heart of the matter. members of this panel. We've made over 350 recommendations, which is too many. It sounds like a lot, but I mean, I guess for 6 years or so, and 2 meetings in most years, which generate, say, 20 to 30 or 40 recommendations, it may seem reasonable. But anyway, all those recommendations are on the website. They're public, and the terms of reference require that the company respond to each of those recommendations, either by implementing the recommendation, which we hope will happen almost all the time, and it has, or if there's no way that the full recommendation can be implemented, or the company has decided that it will not, then it has to explain why it will not, and that goes on the website as well. So that's what we call accountability in this context, I think. This is the website, and as you can see, it's been updated from since this slide a bit, so we're working on it all the time, but it has quite a few pages that you can go to and delve into details about how it works and what it produces. So accomplishments and challenges. The positive outcomes, I won't belabor the point that Alexei made about the 4D seismic survey in 2010. I will repeat what he said about the brochures back there. We have 2 brochures that were prepared for distribution at this meeting. One is, oh, they're here. Where are they?
And this one.
Yeah, one is on the seismic survey monitoring and mitigation program, arguing that this has wide applicability, not just for the Sakhalin 2 case. And the other is a general brochure on WeGoApp. So I invite you to pick those up at some point today. Another thing that had been a really difficult issue within the International Whaling Commission Scientific Committee for years is that there were 2 photo identification catalogs being developed for this really small population of whales for a number of years. One owned by the oil and gas companies, Sakhalin Energy and Exxon Neftegas, in that joint program that Alexei was talking about. They have their own photo ID catalog, and this group of people who you saw in the early slide out on the water in a little inflatable, funded by NGOs from year to year, or some international agencies, at a relatively low budget, collecting photo ID data. So we have these 2 sets of data, and there's always been this argument that why not put them together to provide a more accurate, precise estimate of the population size and trend. So that sounds small, but it was a really difficult and onerous, time-consuming thing that the panel finally achieved, and we do now have one combined assessment using both data sets, but this still needs to be published. Another thing that I think was potentially important is that we had gotten the company to carry out annual beach surveys just on a monthly basis, but on the understanding that it was important to document any deaths of gray whales while off Sakhalin. I think that has benefits for both the company and the wider conservation community, because in some cases where a whale will die or come ashore, certainly in Sakhalin, the first thought that people have is it was killed as a result of some activity by the oil and gas company, and that may not be the case. So it's in the company's interest, I argue, that they find out why whales died, because sometimes that will be, the news will be good from their standpoint. But in any case, that was ongoing for a while, but it's stopped now. So that's a bone of contention between the panel and the company. Inspections of oil spill cleanup equipment, protocols for oil spill response and for avoiding oil spills. Those have been a really strong part of our activity as well. One of the panel members is an expert and has been numerous times to Sakhalin Island now to inspect equipment, observe oil spill response drills, and to review and discuss the company's procedures. And then, as I said before, the transparency is an important element. And the fact that we are still talking, I think, is a good thing about the panel process so far. Ongoing challenges, as Alexei said, we'd have other companies operating in the region that could well be having effects on gray whales, and they have very little. They have no similar oversight advice to the WIGU app. So getting them involved in some way, even if it's just providing information on what they are doing, is something that we need and we don't have. Also, it's been a real failure on our part to get engaged in some meaningful way with the Russian government at some level, or even the state government, the Oblast government in Sakhalin. We're working on it, but we've been working on it for years and we still haven't gotten very far. Several years ago, there was a stranding of a very fresh gray whale on the beach just south of the Piltun Lagoon, and we found out then how important it was to have some process in place, some capacity developed on Sakhalin Island to respond and investigate the stranding. We didn't, and we still don't have a good setup for that, and that seems to be a real shortcoming. As Alexei said, the difficulty of addressing cumulative effects, we always like to talk about cumulative effects, but how to assess them is a big challenge. There's a lot of progress being made nowadays in the context of marine mammals, but we aren't there yet, and certainly the company's not got a serious way of assessing cumulative impacts, and they need that. They need help from us and others to get there. There's also been a major frustration has been that there's been a change in company priorities through the years, I should say, partly given the change in ownership, because when the panel process first began, Shell had a majority share. Now, as Alexei said, Gazprom does, and so the company is really dominated and run by a different company with a different background, different ethos, and different commitment to the process, I think. So we're working on that, and I think it's still a challenge. Also, there have been some serious changes in personnel in the company, and that seems to be a feature of at least this oil and gas company. I don't think it's unusual, because people tend to be in a position for 2 or 3 years and then move on. But in this case, we just get to know a person who's on the company side responsible for the panel interactions, and the person leaves and we start over again. And maybe this is unavoidable, but it has been frustrating. Quickly going on to the range-wide conservation question, there was a workshop in 2002 before any of this panel stuff began. Bob organized that it was in Ulsan, Korea, back in 2002, to look at the conservation needs and current scientific knowledge of western gray whales. In 2008, we had a range-wide workshop in Tokyo that was funded entirely by Sakhalin Energy, I should say. And this was something independent of WIGU. It was simply an effort to advance the range-wide conservation initiative that Alexei mentioned. From that, we developed a formal conservation plan jointly with the International Whaling Commission. That's available on the website, but particularly because of the satellite tracking data or new information, that conservation plan is badly in need of revision. We have to rethink just what's going on with this western gray whale population. And of course, the range-wide initiative has to look at the potential effects of fishing gear which is a serious problem for gray whales wherever they are. And of course, now that we know some of the animals are going east to Canada, moving along the coast along the United States into Mexico and back again, they are exposed there to certainly a lot of ship traffic and portions of that migration, and fishing gear of various types. Those that we assume still go to parts of Asia, including Japan, possibly Korea, and China to some extent, are also exposed to the same risks and perhaps others. So there's plenty out there to worry about. For the future, we're faced with this problem, and I mentioned Justin Cook's model, which has been assessing the population as a single separate unit, the 130 to 150 whales in this population. We know that it's a mixture of animals that go east, and well, we know that a lot of the animals go east. We don't know what proportion do. We assume some still use a different migratory strategy. So how to assess this group of animals that's mixing in the summer is not easy. We're working on that, and at the moment are kind of thinking that it needs to be assessed at least at one level as a summer feeding aggregation. And this is not unprecedented with cetaceans, with large whales, because humpback whales, for example, we assess them as feeding aggregations, which are not necessarily genetically or demographically separate from other aggregations. As Alexei said, the Sakhalin Energy and Exxon are changing their monitoring program from time to time. They've now eliminated the behavior component and only planning to do behavior work, apparently, if at all, during when there's a specific activity that is of concern, like a seismic survey. The panel has resisted this, and I don't know where that's going. We'll have to keep working on that. There's also been aggressive efforts on the part of the Russian party under the production sharing agreement to reduce the amount of money that the company is spending on whale monitoring and research, and probably other wildlife work. I don't know about that, but so there's this tension of looking for ways to reduce the amount of investment in conservation-related work. And then, of course, for us, the possible construction of a third platform to completely develop the Tilton Astok field is a big concern. As Alexei said, so far our understanding of it is that there isn't anything special about it that would make it have any different type of risk than the construction of the previous two platforms, construction and operation, I should say. But the problem is how many platforms like this can be placed in an area without having an impact on the animals. And two seem to be tolerable. Will three? We don't know. So that's a subject for ongoing discussions. Oops, I think I'm done.
Thank you very much. So at this point I wanted to divide the discussion in two pieces. The first one is just a perhaps clarification to Randy, and then I thought we would open it up to our two panelists and other members, Bob in the panel and others in the audience who are interested in asking more sort of fundamental questions about how this panel is operating, what are our challenges. We might ask the organizers to put on the light also. You're welcome to move here if you would like, yes. But why don't we start if there's any specific questions to Randy from the audience. Well, I perhaps then will kick off with a small comment of my own. There was a lot of work on the eastern grey whales regarding the San Ignacio Lagoon, and there was a big industrial project in Mexico, which in fact was one of the bigger industrial projects, and it was within the National Park of Biscaynes, which I think is the largest protected area in the whole of the Americas. At the time, there was a massive campaign against the industrial development, because there was a perception that this seriously could impact the grey whales. It's interesting to see that they actually now we have a connection between the two lagoons, and in both ends of their migration route we have large industrial development, and you know, there is, I think, a lesson to be learned there. The one that was done in San Ignacio was actually spearheaded by Mitsubishi, which is also an interesting coincidence in this circumstance. And as it were, it was actually, as far as I understand, it was largely due to a very effective conservation campaign that that project was, what do you call it, mothballed or stopped. And I think, and it was a decision made by the president of Mexico, which is interesting itself. So it did have a very high political stake in it. I think what we've seen as conservationists over the last decade or so is we used to have a situation where people perceived, you know, that development will always go ahead. But I think we're now heading into a scenario where, you know, you have a license to operate, and that license can be revoked if there's a perception that you haven't done your homework. The Macondo spill, or the Deepwater Horizon, as it's popularly known, I think illustrates this point very clearly. That, you know, if you mess up to some degree, you know, you risk your whole company, and